Hello, I'm Linda Eaton, Executive Vice President of Canon Financial Institute. For many years, I've been a student and a teacher of behavioral finance, concentrating primarily on how client-facing advisors can take advantage of the great progress that's been made in understanding how people make financial decisions, especially in stressful times like this. When I say client-facing advisors, let me be very clear. I really do mean anybody who is interacting with clients right now. Whether you are a wealth advisor, a financial consultant, an administrative assistant, a banker, a trust officer, or administrator, if you're talking to clients, then this webinar would be appropriate for you. What are we going to talk about today? Well, essentially, it's weathering the storm. Weathering the storm. What does that mean? Well, we'd like to be able to maintain client confidence in a volatile environment. So how do we do that? We're going to share some ideas in the next few minutes. And when you put these ideas to work, you can analyze your own practice for vulnerability. You can contact your clients proactively and know what to say. You can demonstrate an understanding of the behavioral finance biases likely to affect clients in a downturn, and prepare client conversations to both maintain and enhance client confidence in a difficult period. Let's begin by thinking about who in your practice might indeed be vulnerable. High on the list would be folks who own businesses. The business owners in the current environment are worried not only about the viability of their own businesses, but they're concerned about their employees. They're concerned about retaining their clientele. For clients who are nearing retirement, this can be a real jolt. What had maybe looked like the best 401k environment in history is now looking quite a bit shakier. Also, those with upcoming needs outside of retirement, the dad who's going to stroke a check for the daughter's upcoming wedding, or the parents who are putting their daughter through medical school. Anybody who has a large check to write in the near future is probably really feeling the bump right now in terms of the need for liquidity. And then finally, even clients who don't fit what I would call the high-risk profile, those who are just generally risk averse are probably having a pretty tough time in this environment. So I would caution you to take a look at, I would encourage you to take a look at your clientele and think, who really needs my attention most right now? Whatever position a client is in, one of the things that we know is that financial decisions come from the most emotional part of the human brain. Several years ago, the Institute for Economic Research queried about 1,200 people and asked this question: would you rather live in a world where you earn $100,000 a year and most people earn $85,000, or you earn 110, but most people earn 150,000? And resoundingly, the answer was, I would rather earn $100,000 a year. So it's not really the dollar amount of disposable cash that drives that decision. It's, I want to be doing better than the guy next door. How does this happen in the human brain? The first part of the brain that develops is called the amygdala. It's about the size of a walnut at the very top of your spinal cord, and it is command central for the human body. It is the amygdala that drives the fight or flight stress response that we're going to be looking at in just a few minutes. But it's also the amygdala that basically tells you to breathe and blink and do the things that will quite literally keep your body alive. About 2/3 of the human brain is connected through the limbic system, and the limbic system is nothing but raw emotion. There are no words there. There are only feelings. And if you can think about the most unemotional person you've ever met, I can pretty much guarantee to you that 2/3 of their brain is still driven by feelings. The last part of the human brain that develops is called the neocortex, and that's where all rational thought and language actually resides. As financial professionals, we tend to use the neocortex a lot, but please understand that it is the result, not the driver, in terms of behavior. It's really the amygdala and the limbic system that drive human behavior. Now, why is this important to us? Well, markets are emotional things. You know, you and I are going to take a little walk through market history. But before we do, I'd like to tell you just a quick story that I read several years ago in the Yoga Journal. The story involved two fish who somehow learned how to speak English, and they were swimming around in a resort area when a human came bounding into the water and turned and said to his friends, "Come on in, the water's beautiful." And one fish said to the other fish, "What is water?" You see, we swim in this stuff, and it's very, very ordinary and usual and familiar to us. But even some of our savviest clients are driven more by emotion than they are by fact when it comes to market upheavals. What we're looking at is almost 100 years of history of the Dow. And I'd like you to notice that the red spikes that go downward are bear markets, and the blue ones, obviously, that go upward are bull markets. Now, take a look at this. The Great Depression, 34 months of loss, and altogether 83.4% loss, followed by, drumroll, 167 months of return, of gain, in which the total return on the market was 815%. If you look at the entire 100 years that we have in front of us here, what we realize is that a bear market lasts about a year and 4 months with an average loss of about 41%, while in a bull market, it can charge on for as much as 9 years, or have we just recently seen longer than that, but with an average return of 476%. But clients don't feel that that's what's going on. A lot of clients right now are feeling loss aversion. We've all heard about the fight or flight stress response, and it really is all about survival. Now, you need to know that I know that human beings and saber-toothed tigers do not coexist on planet Earth. But if you think about it, your body is actually prepared, designed to be able to fight off wild animals. Now, this doesn't happen very much in human life, but let me pose a question. Have you ever put money in a Coke machine and you didn't get your Coke? What does your body feel like doing? It feels like killing the machine as though it were a tiger. And unfortunately, many of our clients are having exactly that same reaction to the markets that we are seeing over the last couple of weeks and probably in the weeks to come. And so it's a visceral, physical response. And this is really an important thing to think of, because the response, fight or flight, says move, 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 do something. And depending on your client's market savvy and personal situation, that move, move, move might make them want to buy or make them want to sell. But it doesn't make them want to stop and think. They're driven by emotion. We also know that losses are felt more deeply and remembered longer than gains. So that people, for example, who were invested in 2008 and lost a great deal, feel that more strongly than all of the gains that came successively to that. In addition, clients experience something called anchoring. If you had a client, for example, and I'll just use the S&P 500 to keep numbers simple. If you had a client who bought in when the S&P was at, say, about 2,100, and it went all the way up to 3,100 plus, and maybe today it's at about 2,500, they don't perceive themselves to be 500 up. They perceive themselves to be 500 down. And that's a very, very unsettling feeling for many clients. They're anchored on essentially the wrong number. Clients additionally suffer from something called selective attention, and this affects all of us. Several years ago, one of my sisters bought a car. It was a Nissan Versa, which I've since learned is maybe the smallest car in the world that doesn't actually contain clowns. But we were on the phone. She was living in Virginia. I was in New York, and I was asking her why she bought the car she bought. She described it for me. And the next day, I was home in my own town, stopped at a red light in my own car, and the car in front of me, of course, was a Nissan Versa. And I got on the highway and there were dozens of them all over the place. And they'd all been there the days before, but I wasn't primed to notice them. When you think about an environment like ours with a 24/7 news cycle, and a news cycle that however you consume your information, whether you get it from websites, from vlogs or blogs or television or radio, what you are looking at is a medium that was designed to sell advertising. And bad news sells a lot more advertising, gets a lot more eyeballs on the screen than good news. And the bad news is there for the taking. But one of the things we're hearing a lot in literally every news source right now is a heaping tablespoon of conjecture. Any, and I'm doing air quotes now, any news broadcast that purports to tell you that this could be the opening of a worldwide global recession that could last a decade, or it could be over in 3 or 4 or 5 weeks. Anytime you hear the word could, understand that you're hearing conjecture, not news. But our clients are bombarded with this, as I say, 24/7. We also all experience something called recency bias. Whatever I just saw or heard or read becomes overweighted in my mind. And so with the sort of nonstop gloom and doom scenarios that we're all exposed to, I think it's very, very easy for a client to fall into a truly negative emotional state. So what can we do about this? Well, I'm going to offer you kind of a toolkit for dealing with clients in a state of high emotion, and it's going to begin with listening, to ask meaningful, open-ended questions. You might have clients who, for various reasons, are kind of on the ledge right now, and because I know financial advisors, I've been working with them for more than 30 years, I know that most of us were driven to the business not only by an interest in finance, but also by a concern for other human people. And I know that when somebody is suffering, our normal impulse is to just reach out and share what we know, to turn down the volume, to ease the pain. We want to talk them off the ledge. And what I'm going to suggest is that you do something very different. Listen them off the ledge. The more that you can create an atmosphere where you encourage your client to talk, the easier it will be to get to the way to actually help them. So how do we do this? We want to use questions rather than talking. Let's say that you've got a client who's concerned about retirement in the current environment. And we can say, well, Alex, I see 3 risks that you need to consider in retirement: longevity, inflation, and the cost of future health care. As a matter of fact, when we consider longevity, we have tables that indicate blah, 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 blah. And to mitigate these risks, I believe that we should consider, and we don't understand at this point that the client has essentially expired on the other end of the call. If we can get them to talk to us, it's so much more beneficial. Alex, I see 3 risks that you need to consider in retirement: longevity, inflation, and the cost of health care. If you were to outlive your assets, who would be able to take care of you? Tell me more. Tell me more. Tell me more. Why and tell me more are 2 of the most valuable questions you can ever ask. If your assets weren't sufficient to sustain your lifestyle, what might you need to consider giving up? What happens here is when we ask the client questions, first of all, they remain engaged. They have not taken a nap or chosen to play solitaire on the other end of the phone. They're not only actively engaged, but you're helping them self-discover. They're also giving you all kinds of clues as to how to proceed. They'll tell you what they're most concerned about. They'll tell you what they're okay about. And one of the things that happens in a very real emotional sense is venting. The more you can get them to talk, the more comfortable they're actually going to end up being. There are some very specific questions that we can ask. Concern questions, which explore their current situation. I know the market's crazy. How are you feeling? Tell me more. Tell me more. What challenges are you facing in your business? You'll see that these are primarily open-ended questions, and they start with words like how. How are you doing and why? And tell me about and share and explain. One way that you can pretty easily tell whether a question is open-ended or closed-ended is that questions that begin with verbs often are closed-end. Have you, did you, could you, will you, generally lead us to yes or no. So we want to develop the habit of asking open-ended concern questions. Concern questions can lead us to negative consequence questions. Negative consequence questions where we get the client to consider the consequence of not taking action or taking inappropriate action. A negative consequence question might look something like this. Mrs. Jackson, if we were to sell all of your positions right now at a loss and the market turned around, what might that mean to you in 3 or 5 years? So get them to tell you the bad news rather than you delivering it yourself. Even more useful can be what we call positive consequence questions, where you get the client to himself or herself express the benefit of implementing a solution. So that in the same example, I might say, well, Mrs. Jackson, if we were to just hold the course, steady through weather this storm and keep our positions as they are, and market history being what it is, they came back even more beneficially than before, what might that mean to your future? So get the client to talk rather than us talking at them like crazy. Helpful to have a roadmap for these conversations, and we at Canon have developed the acronym GROWTH for a good way to have conversations with clients in the current environment. The G in the word growth is for goals. You know, when we think about it, especially in light of market history, all but the most short-term goals are probably attainable for pretty much everybody in your clientele. So if we can get them to focus not so much on the external reality, the virus, the spread of the virus, the upheavals in the markets, the losses maybe in the 401k, if we can get them to focus on their own goals, your retirement is still secure, for example, then they not only feel better, but it opens the door for very productive conversation. Let's look at those goals in terms of now current market reality. Can we still finance education for the children or grandchildren? Can we still look at retirement in a reasonable time frame? So what are our goals? What is the current reality? And what options lay open to us right now? And I suggest that we do this with clients in the most collaborative manner possible so that we co-design a way forward. Now, in all kinds of market environments, it's absolutely critical to track the advice that we give to clients and what happens afterwards. But never, ever has there been a time in most of our careers where good record keeping was more important. And I'm going to say more about that in just a couple of minutes. But we want to track those goals. And in a market environment like we're currently experiencing, hold their hand, stay connected, reach out more often than you generally would. So you can use the growth conversation as kind of a guideline for how to proceed with your clients. When we think about holding on to the client relationships we have, one of the unfortunate things that we know is that when markets go down, lawsuits go up. So unfortunately, I have to say that whether a client takes your advice currently or not, it is critical, it is imperative that you document, document, document. You'll see my email address on the screen right here, leaton@canonfinancial.com, and I absolutely welcome your questions and your input. But before we go, I'd like to just say a few words to you on a personal basis. All of us in the industry are under stress. The Journal of Financial Therapy has noted that as many as 90% of client-facing advisors had symptoms of PTSD in 2008. And between 2008 and 2010, about a third of advisors actually left the business. It's critically important that you take good care of yourself right now during this time of crisis. As we're telling our clients, and as they say in one of the lines of Les Miserables, even the darkest night will end and the sun will rise. So until then, take the time to exercise, to get enough sleep, to eat reasonably, hug your children, do the things that nourish your soul and feed you. It's hard to take care of others when you're not really taking good care of yourself. We at Canon Financial Institute stand at the ready to help you and your clientele. So until our paths cross again, stay well, my friends. You're doing important work.